Må himle och jorden göra midjer och rik. Må hingve Freyr och visman guden hoden gör mig för rik. Då jag kjutnade att lilliga ljuset söra. Med denna sorg här öldriga övriga mig. Med ett år gör jag mitt folk. Vad den lätta mig var handlar sånglös hjärta.
Hello friends, my name is Artie Thurger and today I'm going to talk about Freyfaxi. Now, I know that I've already talked about Freyfaxi in the previous video and I will leave a link down below in the description so you might watch it. But there was more I wanted to tell you about this Northern European pagan tradition, and since I didn't want to extend the previous video so much, well, I'm making this video solely to talk about Freyfaxi. Now, today I'm going to give you a more academical approach to this celebration by giving you a couple of examples of the cult of Freyr, so you might understand that to our Norse ancestors, the god of agriculture and fertility was one of the most important, most worshipped and beloved deities in the Norse pantheon. So, let's get started. Every religion is always changing, and no matter how hard we try to follow the footsteps of our ancestors, we will never fully understand the essence of their spiritual beliefs. And it's very common to see that every religion, and it doesn't matter if it's polytheistic or monotheistic, but every religion has its spiritual branches, and this also happens with the Northern European pagan traditions. There are some who prefer just to worship the Aesir, others only the Vanir, and of course there are those who worship the gods of the underworld and the deities with a more primal concept. And obviously there are those who just want to worship one deity and focus on that one archetype. Suffice it to say that for most neo-pagans who practice the Northern European pagan traditions, they prefer to worship just Odin, or perhaps just Thor, or the both of them. It seems that these two deities are very famous amongst neo-pagans, and everything else in this spiritual tradition seems of no importance. However, for our ancestors it was obviously different. The majority of the populace, they were farmers, herders, fishermen, so they would prefer to worship deities connected with fertility, deities who gave them plenty, rather than deities connected with death, sacrifice and war. And talking about that, the god Odin, for instance, he is a god connected with war, sacrifice and death, rather than wisdom and magic as we commonly think today. So the cult of Odin was a very restricted one and only for a certain elite of the society. But about the cult of Odin for another video. With this being said, I will move on to the real subject of this video. To our Norse Germanic ancestors, one of the most worshipped deities was the god Freyr, a god worshipped since the Iron Age or perhaps even further back, all the way to the Middle Ages. Friko or Freyr. A name which appears to be identical with the Teutonic word represented in Old English as Freya, meaning king or lord. The god Freyr was mostly worshipped at Uppsala, Sweden. But there are some historians and archaeologists that have stated that a certain image of Freyr existed and it was used for worshipping in Trondheim, Norway, and it was carried there from Sweden. There are certain stories that mention this very image being carried around the country and to which people offered sacrifices. So I cannot say it was a common practice, but it indeed existed, this ritual, this sort of ceremony, carrying an image around and people making offerings to it. More or less like in the Christian tradition, for instance, when people carry the image of Christ or the Virgin Mary or some saint in a procession. And we have Tacitus, a Roman senator, a politician of the Roman Empire and an historian of some sorts. He mentions a certain cult with these similarities in his Germania. An image of a goddess being carried in a cart and taken into a forest, into a sacred grove, and sacrifices being offered to this goddess in her honor, mostly human sacrifices. Well, in this case, just human sacrifices, people being immolated. Ghastly. Of course, there were many sacrifices to the god Freyr, but mostly animal sacrifices. For instance, there is an account of black oxen being sacrificed to the god Freyr by the mythical hero Hadding. And these sacrifices were often called Frodblod or Frodblot by the Swedes, meaning Freyr's sacrifices. And there are frequent occurrences of the name Freyr being included in Swedish and Danish place names, which indicates the prevalence of the cult of Freyr in both of those countries. Worshipping the god Freyr was very popular in Sweden, and as I've said in this video and I have given you a couple of examples, it became a common practice in certain places in Norway, and from there it was carried into Iceland by the first settlers, and these settlers being the Norwegian aristocracy fleeing from Norway because of religious and political persecution. As late as the 10th century, there are historical accounts that represent the people of Trondheim as refusing to break their image of the god Freyr under King Olaf Tryggvason's orders. And this was a time when Christianity was already spreading throughout Norway. And the people of Trondheim refused this kingly command because they had long served this deity and the deity had done good to them. And there are folk accounts from the people of Trondheim that state that this deity talked with them and showed them things to come and gave them peace and prosperity. And it was customary in the great festivals to drink in honor to the god Freyr to secure this peace, this prosperity, plenty. And I'm remembering now, there is another account of a piece of jewelry, a talisman, in which an image of Freyr was marked in silver, and it's mentioned as having been owned by one of the petty kings of Norway, and more or less in the 9th century, if memory doesn't fail me. And this was given by King Harald to Hingimund. So as you can see, there are historical accounts and archaeological evidences that shows us the importance the god Freyr had to our Norse ancestors and how popular he was in Sweden and some parts of Norway. And even in Iceland, the traces of a popular cult of Freyr are very clear, and more than one prominent person mentions this cult in the sagas. For instance, one account from Thorgrim, brother-in-law of Gisli Surson. In the saga, it is mentioned that Thorgrim himself wanted to make a festival at the beginning of winter to greet winter in honor to the god Freyr, making another sacrifice to the god Freyr. Now, from this saga and from other sagas and other accounts, I've picked parts and I've summarized them a lot so I could tell you and show you once again how popular the cult of Freyr was in ancient Scandinavia. And even for these people who were polytheistic, many in these societies worship just one deity, and that one deity being Freyr. So if you don't mind, I will tell you some more accounts and other sagas, very much summarized, and well, let's just do it. When Thorgrim was murdered and had been laid in a grave mound, it was noticed that the snow never lay on the south or west sides of the mound, and the ground never froze there. It was supposed that Thorgrim was so highly esteemed by the god Freyr himself for the offerings he made to him that the god did not wish Thorgrim's mound to freeze. Great attachment to this deity also appears in the story of Rafnakel, which I have mentioned in the previous video, who loved no other god more than Freyr and gave the deity all his most valuable possessions. Among the offerings was a horse, Rafnakel's own horse, which on that account bore the name of Freyfaxi. Another Freyfaxi belonged to Brand in Wandensdal, and most people believed that he had a religious reverence for the horse. Horses owned by Freyr are also mentioned as existing in Trondheim in the days of Olav Tryggvason by the end of the 10th century. So Freyfaxi became the well-known name for the cult of Freyr and the celebration to him during August. Alright friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. All the links to my social media are down below at the description. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video and as always, tack för idag!